Welcome to the Let's Eat Grandma Career Warrior Podcast.
Welcome to the 68th episode of the Let's Eat Grandma Career Warrior Podcast, where our goal is not only to help you land your dream job, but also to help you live your best life. Today, we're going to empower ourselves just a little bit more with one of the biggest things when it comes to self-awareness, knowing what our biggest strengths are. For Steve Kerr, it was knocking down three-point shots. For Wonder Woman, it was her superhuman strength and ability to fly. And for Winston Churchill, it was his legendary ability to make a speech. What is your superpower? It is so important to have a strong sense of self-awareness in this topic, because if you're not aware of this on a daily basis, you just won't be growing professionally like you could and adding deep value to as many people as possible. So today, we're going to discuss the topic of greatest strength, and in the very end, I'm going to give you a resource to help you smash this question in the interview. So tie your capes on tight and get ready to blast off with our 68th episode of the Career Warrior Podcast. All right, so let's talk about why it is important to know the answer to what is your biggest strength. Listen, it's good to know how you're going to answer this in an interview, but the more I was thinking about it, the more I realized this is just something that's good to know. It's good to have self-awareness, just as much as if you knew what your biggest weakness was. Now, I've put some time thinking about my answer. I remember back in high school when I took my very first AP exam. And for those of you who don't have AP exams, it's basically an advanced placement exam to place out of certain credits in college. And this one was world history. I studied, I remember, for hours and hours and hours and hours. This was something that I really cared about because it was the first time I had taken one of these classes, and I just wanted to do really well in the exam. The part that made this even more intense was my mom said, if you do well in this exam, so if you get a 4 or a 5, then I will buy you a brand new guitar. And I asked her if I could have the Les Paul guitar, and it's just, for me, it's one of the most beautiful guitars ever. I had a guitar on the line for doing well with this exam, and I studied for hours and hours. So every single opportunity I had, I went to the car, I studied. Whenever I had downtime, I would skip hanging out with friends just because I wanted that guitar so badly. I remember when test day came, I went in, I took the exam. I felt okay about it. I wasn't really sure how I answered the free response questions, but I felt like I did good enough to where there was a chance I got a 4 or a 5. Now, when the exam results finally came back, I could not believe what the score was. I got a 2 out of 5. Not only did I do poorly in the exam, but after talking with my friends, I did way less than what they did. I got a score that was way less than what they got. I was, needless to say, crushed. I had a guitar on the line. I could not get that guitar. And not only that, but I just put so much time and effort studying for this exam. So the next year came around and it completely changed the way that I studied. I knew that if I wanted to do well in exams, I needed to go deeper than just reading text and trying to memorize facts. The thing about junior year is you have even more AP exams to take because you're taking more AP classes. Well, you better believe I went back and did way better than I did the year before. In fact, this completely changed the way I took AP exams until I graduated from high school. I ended up getting 4s and 5s in most of my exams after that. And even the tougher ones, the ones that were harder than AP World History, which I considered to be pretty hard, I ended up scoring well. And this is when I first realized that this was my superpower. My biggest strength is my ability to get knocked down on the floor, disappointed by my results, and then get back up again and absolutely crush it. When it came down to it, this is the quality that I saw in myself that I didn't necessarily see in other people. And flash forward more than a decade later, when I was really beginning to ramp up Let's Eat Grandma, I remember at the time just putting so much time and money into parts of my business and didn't see the return. I was disappointed in the same way that those exams had disappointed me. This was dependent on me for me to live and for my income, and I was struggling to meet that. And yeah, let's put it this way. The AP exams, in terms of life seriousness, is petty compared to what this was. However, I bounced back by learning what worked for my business and what didn't. and have since then 5x'd my brand awareness, and sales are at an all-time high. I don't say these things to brag, but I tell you these things just because I know this is my biggest strength, to get knocked down and then persist and then to come up back better than ever. And just knowing that gives me confidence in the ability to use this to my advantage. Now I'm much less intimidated by setbacks. I also know that by using setbacks to my advantage, that I can benefit more with them than if they had never happened. Isn't that crazy? Ladies and gentlemen, this is what knowing what your biggest strengths are. If you know what your biggest strengths are, then you have the ability to use them and to better your life in the future. If you don't know what your biggest strengths are, you are missing out on one of the biggest opportunities you have in life, and that's to give your gifts to their fullest. And for all of those who are like me and are afraid to let others know what your strengths are, or worse, to prevent them from shining, you need to get it together and change your attitude. You're not being humble, you're being unconfident and not letting your gifts shine. The best thing you can do is to be very matter of fact and not build an ego out of your strengths or your weaknesses. Guys, they are important. It is good to have self-awareness, but they are not who you are at your core. That is the essence of humility. And if you want to be humble, then that's how you're going to get there, is by having a true sense of self-awareness and not letting it get to your ego. Mother Teresa, probably one of the most humble people to live on this planet ever, said, "Humility is the mother of all virtues, purity, charity, and obedience. It is in being humble that our love becomes real, devoted, and ardent. If you are humble, nothing will touch you, neither praise nor disgrace, because you know what you are. If you are blamed, you will not be discouraged. If they call you a saint, you will not put yourself on a pedestal." So just think about these wise words and what this can mean in your career. If you know what your biggest weaknesses are, if you know what your biggest strengths are, you can answer these things very matter-of-factly in an interview. It won't get down to you when an interviewer might start picking at your weaknesses and really make it a topic of the interview. This is just matter of fact, and this is something you're working on. And the same exact thing goes with your biggest strengths. If people ask what your biggest strengths are, you can tell them your answer without feeling like you're bragging, because this is just a matter of fact what your gifts are, and this is how you plan on using it for a company. True humility in the workplace is recognizing how you really are and not faking it like you know what you're doing all the time. Am I right? How many people do you know who are totally faking it and pretending like they have their shit together all the time? It's just not reality. No one has their act together all the time. It's just the way we work as humans. Hopefully with this podcast, I'm starting to give you that sense of self-awareness, or at least the encouragement that you have your strengths, you have your weaknesses, and this is something you need to know and use to your advantage. I'm going to roll a clip, and this is probably one of the most famous speeches in American history. Check it out.
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty.
Okay, so this is Dr. Martin Luther King, and not only is this an amazing speech, but this is probably one of the most influential speeches. In fact, this speech was used to rally people together under a common vision, which was to give everyone human rights, regardless of what their race was. This is just an incredible thing here. Do you think Martin Luther King all of a sudden had an amazing ability to give a speech at the time? No, I am sure that this is something that he had to develop and practice over time and use. And let's be real, he was confident in his ability to give a speech. This was something that he knew very fervently was one of his strengths and used to his advantage to help change a nation. So right now, today, I'm going to pose a challenge to all you warriors right now. And that challenge is this. I want you to identify your biggest strength. And if you're one of those people that just don't have time to write it down, what you can do right now is just pause the tape right now, pause the podcast right now, and sit in silence for a little bit and start to think about what your biggest strength is. It may not come to you right away. In fact, you may come up with a strength, and your biggest strength may emerge later. But come up with what you believe your biggest strength is professionally that you can use in your career. Now, after that, and this is really where you're going to have to dive deep into a little bit of self-awareness, ask yourself, when was a time that I used my strength to my advantage? And then second, when was a time when you did not use it and it could have been helpful in your life? So once again, ask yourself, when you come up with your biggest strength, when was a time that you used it to your advantage? And when was a time that you did not use it and it could have been helpful? I'll tell you an example right now, and this doesn't go to my biggest strength, but it's to another one of my strengths, which is genuine human empathy. I can listen to other people and I can understand their emotions and their perspective and where they're coming from. I've used it to my advantage, and that's not a really good way to phrase that, but okay, whatever. But I've used it to my advantage when thinking about how my company runs. I run a resume writing company in which I work with resume writers who write packages for my company. I have a genuine sense of human empathy because I used to be a resume writer. I used to write resumes for my own company. And now I have people that work with me to write these packages. So I know exactly how they work. I know their motivations. I know exactly what their pain points are when it comes to writing packages. So I've been able to use this to my advantage to develop processes and procedures that make people motivated and put out good work for Let's Eat Grandma. A time when I have not used empathy to my advantage, or I have not used empathy to my fullest ability, is quite recently actually was giving a meetup talk. This was a talk that I give here in Austin for job seekers to help them get better at resumes. I remember just getting so in my head about the content and the material that I was covering that I didn't take the time to actually listen to the people who attended the meetup. And I could have used my empathetic power to speak with these people and ask them where they came from, what their biggest pain points were in their job search, and take that time to genuinely connect with them. I do believe to this day that if I was able to connect with these people, listen to them, and understand where they were coming from, and take the time to actually do that, I probably would have had a better talk or presentation. When is a time that you have not used your greatest strengths to your ability? Now, how to answer this in an interview? That, my friend, is an art and a delicate dance, which we will address right now. The biggest piece of advice I can give you is the same thing when it comes to writing down your biggest weaknesses. Write down your top 2 to 3 strengths and pick the best one. And what I want you to do is go in front of a mirror and rehearse your answer at least 5 times. I know you know what your biggest strength is by now. You took the time to write it down. You thought about it. It doesn't necessarily translate over to an interview answer. And that is the art of communication, is being able to concisely answer these things without babbling on or making your answer seem unconfident or too short. So I really do recommend practicing. All the best interview coaches out there will say the same thing. You need to make sure that you're practicing your answer. And bonus points if you can actually rehearse your answer in front of a friend, a colleague, or someone who can help you and coach you through your answer, because this is what's going to give you an edge in an interview. Most people probably aren't rehearsing their answers like you, right? You are someone who takes necessary steps to go above and beyond and to crush that interview. This is my call to action to you. Write down those top 2 to 3 strengths that you have as a professional. And if you have an interview coming up, make sure you rehearse those answers, because you're going to come across a lot more confident and strong in the interview. I'm going to post a resource in the description of this podcast. It's going to be a blog with 5 different strengths that you have as a professional. And obviously, none of these may actually be your strengths. Maybe they will be. This will hopefully get you inspired about what your actual strengths are. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our 68th episode of the Career Warrior Podcast. It has been a blast. Make sure to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Chris Villanueva, CPRW. Would love to hear from you and what you would like to learn more of. All right, you take care and go out and be warriors. And for more on your job search, make sure to check out letseatgrandma.com. That's where you can find our blog, where we post the podcast show notes and so many more articles that will help you in your job search. You can also check out our resume services if you are interested in getting your resume professionally reworked. And please make sure to show us some love by jumping onto iTunes and leaving us a rating. The support from my fellow warriors will show the world how great this podcast is and help other people in their job search. Pay it forward. Thanks, guys, for being true warriors, and thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next week.